Children and the young at heart want to come down front, I have a story for you called Magic Recipes. I know there are some young at heart older people here too. Good morning. I love your rainbow flag. All right. This is a story that I wrote, but I'm sorry that it does not have any pictures yet. I'm hoping to find an illustrator that will really make it come alive. It's called Magic Recipes, and there are props to go with it. Zara knew she was dreaming. She had fallen asleep thinking about cookies, warm chocolate chip cookies, soft in the middle and crunchy around the edges. Zara knows that if you want to make a nice batch of yummy cookies, you need three things. You need some ingredients like flour and sugar, and I don't have butter. You also need, where is it? You also need a recipe that tells you how to turn the ingredients into cookies, right? And you need someone like Zara, who mixes the ingredients together and puts the cookies in the oven, right? But here in her dream was a crinkly old woman looking like Earth herself, gently and kindly pressing a small red stone into Zara's hand. I knew there was something I needed to do before we began here. Here it is. Saying, as she pressed the stone into Zara's hand, "This is a magic recipe. It can turn into something yummy all by itself." Sleepy, Zara put the stone under her pillow and went back to dreaming of warm cookies. When Zara awoke in the morning, she felt under her pillow and was astonished to find the small red stone still warm from the old woman's hand. Doubtful, she padded into the kitchen in her pajamas. She pulled out the tin of flour from the cupboard by the stove and the sugar, and she put them on the table with some butter and a carton of eggs, and then she carefully set the red stone in the middle of them and went back down the hall to brush her teeth. When she came back to the kitchen, the ingredients were all just where she had left them. She sighed. The dream seemed so real, and the kind old woman so nice. She had hoped the red stone would turn the ingredients into cookies by magic. Dad came into the kitchen. His eyebrow went up when he saw the ingredients. The eyebrow that means, what's going on here? Zara sighed again and explained about the old woman, the red stone, and the magic recipe. Dad's eyebrow went even higher. Did you think that the magic recipe would make itself into cookies as long as the ingredients were nearby? Zara nodded and looked at the floor. Dad picked up the red stone from the counter and said, "Zara, I don't know about the old woman in your dream, but this is a magic recipe, not for cookies, but for something much more interesting." Now Zara lifted her eyebrows. Dad said, "How about we make some cookies and talk about it?" Zara smiled. "Chocolate chip?" "Sure," Dad said. Dad found a recipe, and they began measuring and mixing the flour and the butter and the chocolate chips and the other ingredients. Dad said, "Zara, you know that most recipes are just words that tell us how to make something. We have to find the ingredients, measure them like the recipe says, mix them just right, and bake them at just the right temperature." "Everybody knows that." Zara popped a chocolate chip into her mouth. Dad ignored her, saying, "We could make cookies without a recipe, but the recipe can't make cookies without us. It would take some really special magic for a recipe to choose the ingredients all by itself and measure them and mix them just right without any people doing it. Zara frowned. I guess it was pretty silly to think a little stone could turn itself into cookies. I just wanted it to be real. Dad said, but Zara, that special magic does happen sometimes, and magic recipes are real. Even most grown-ups don't know about it, but it's true. Magic recipes not only have the directions for making something, they can find the right ingredients and measure and mix them and make something new and wonderful all by themselves. Zara's eyes got wide. Do they make cookies? Dad smiled. Much better than cookies. Magic recipes make things that are alive. Dad held up the red stone. This is a magic recipe for a beautiful plant, a bean plant. Most people call this a kidney bean, but if you put it in the ground, it will begin gathering ingredients from the dirt and the air and make itself come alive. It will grow taller than you. It's a seed, and seeds are magic recipes. Zara thought about that while the cookies were in the oven. She said, are all seeds magic? Dad said, yes. Remember the acorns we found last spring with the leaves and roots growing out of them already? Acorns are magic recipes for giant oak trees. Eggs are magic recipes too for chickens and robins and lots of other animals. Even you came from a magic recipe. Zara's eyes grew big. Me? I thought Mom made me. Now it was Dad's turn to think for a minute. Finally, he said, you grew inside Mom's belly using ingredients from her, but you did the choosing and measuring and mixing to make yourself ready to be born. The timer on the oven dinged and Zara jumped up. The cookies are done. She thought about magic recipes while she and Dad munched on fresh-smelling chocolate chip cookies, soft in the middle and crunchy around the edges, still warm from the oven. Dad pointed to Zara's cookie. You're still making yourself. That cookie is an ingredient that in a few hours will be part of your body, and only the magic recipe inside you knows how to measure and mix it with the rest of you. Zara liked the idea that she had come from the same kind of magic that turns acorns into oak trees and eggs into robins. She wondered about how magic recipes choose and measure ingredients. That part seemed truly magic. That night, she was still wondering about it when the old earth woman again came and sat on her bed, smiling a twinkly dream woman smile. Zara asked, did you come from a magic recipe? The woman gently patted Zara's hand. Everyone and everything comes from a magic recipe. Zara sat up. Things come from magic recipes too? Dad said only plants and animals. The old woman's eyes glittered like moonlight. There are many kinds of recipes, Zara. Some for stars, some for mountains, some for whales. Even Earth herself made herself from a magic recipe and then made recipes for living things like you. Zara tried to imagine a magic recipe that could make everything on Earth, even new magic recipes. She remembered that even now, the recipe inside her was making her stronger, smarter, and taller. She smiled sleepily and laid back on her pillow, dreaming of blue robin's eggs, little red beans, and of course, warm chocolate chip cookies, soft in the middle and crunchy around the edges. Before you go back to your seats, if you would like to take a few beans to plant and see and watch them grow, you can. You probably should take 3, because if you take 1, you might be unlucky. Big people can too. If you want to grow some beans. Well, it's spring. In Harrisburg, the daffodils came up in February this year, which is kind of scary, and a completely different service topic. Whenever spring comes, I often experience spring as a big kind of sigh of relief. You know, some of the layers of heavy clothing come off and I can move more freely. And my slides are not advancing, are they?
A few moments later.
All right. There is the heavy clothing coming off and moving more freely. Now there's an echo. You know, technology allows us to do things, I'm still hearing an echo, that you couldn't do without it, right? And it's wonderful until you depend on it. And then it's like, All right. Clothing, some of that clothing comes off, I can move a little more freely, and then, you know, the snow and ice start to give way to spiky green rockets shooting up out of the soil. And that then begins a countdown to riotous color, followed by hyacinth ecstasy, drifting on the wind like free hallucinogens, but better, and of course, safer. Is it working now? Still hearing an odd. Now, maybe? Yeah. Okay, good. Little peeps begin to fill the social media, not those peeps. Little peeps begin to fill the social media feeds of those who are lucky enough to have chickens. And for most of my life, that was me. I hatched my first chickens at age 8, and then every year after that until college. My little brother hatched ducks and my sister had geese. So every spring we would fire up the incubator and fill it with eggs, multicolored chicken eggs, larger kind of greasy looking duck eggs, and big elegant goose eggs. Now, chicken eggs take about 21 days to hatch, ducks around 28, and geese average about 32 days, which meant that after 3 weeks of excited anticipation, we had nonstop awe and wonder for 11 or 12 days every spring. But you know, you never get 100%. There are always some eggs that don't hatch. Sometimes there's stragglers that hatch a few days later than you expect. So we would wait till like 35 days just to be sure. But there were always a few duds. There was another reason to procrastinate turning off the incubator. No one wants to mess with those duds because they're rotten eggs. And rotten eggs can explode. And if any of that gets on you, I guarantee the smell will cost you your most recent meal. So this disposal task usually fell to my mom, who would carefully carry the whole incubator out into a field, and then she would gingerly throw each egg as far as she could without exerting too much stress on the shell. So one year she picked up the last egg from the incubator, and as her wind-up brought it near her right ear, it peeped. She couldn't believe it. It peeped again. She put it back in the incubator, took it back in the house, and plugged it back in. And a day later, mind you, this is almost 10 days after the normal duck incubation time, an odd-looking duckling hatched out like a boss. It was too much younger than its siblings to be raised with them, so I'm a slide ahead somehow. That is not a duckling. That is a duckling. It was too much younger. You know, the age difference is really important with young birds, and so it became a pet. We raised it separately. It was pretty special, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. If you have seen birds hatched or watched a person being born, that's a person being born. Actually, that's my daughter on her first morning. She was born at like 9:20 p.m. and she's a UU minister now, so this is an old photo. You've probably felt this sense of deep magic and mystery as they emerge, new life emerging. Well, this is all pretty well described by molecular biochemistry. So in that sense, it's not quote unquote magical or mysterious at all. Have you seen this chart? It's the, I think what I zoomed in on at first is the colase cycle, but this is a map of all the different metabolic processes and changes in animal bodies. So, you know, in that regard, it's not really magical. We know this stuff. And therein lies the quandary and the opportunity of being alive at this time in the history of science and knowledge. Because we rest on centuries of astounding success at describing the mechanical details of cause and effect, down to the constituent part of atoms so small that a single grain of table salt contains about as many atoms as there are blades of grass on the earth. We know this stuff. That's science. We take things apart to see how they work, then we take those parts apart, and so on, reducing every object and phenomenon to its parts. And it has been phenomenally successful. But some things, some really important aspects of reality get lost when you reduce a whole system to its individual parts. For example, is surface tension a real thing? Of course, it's real, but is it well, it's real. If you're a water strider, you can feel it, you can stand on it, right? So it has to be real. But is it a thing? Is it an object? It's not, though it acts like one, and is not made of things either. Surface tension is a phenomenon that happens when lots of water molecules interact with one another at the boundary between water and air. It's made of relationships between the molecules, not the molecules themselves. If you add a drop of soap, the surface tension just disappears. The molecules are all still there, but the soap is like some kind of home wrecker. It interrupts the relationships between the water molecules. Science has been so successful at revealing reality's mechanisms that most of us still walk around with a mechanistic worldview of the universe as a kind of clock ticking away. And when the season hand ticks around to spring, click, whir, and out come the cuckoo peeps, right? And this is why so many of our traditionally religious neighbors and friends are wary and weary of science. They hear science saying it's all nothing but molecules, and it's nothing but atoms and the laws of physics, and reducing, there's that word again, reducing everything to the mechanical, to the mundane. Some scientists are still talking like that, but it's only half the story we now know. Because many of the things we take for granted as being real things are actually more like surface tension. They're made of relationships that disappear when you take things apart. They're not made of parts. They're not mechanical. They arise out of relationships, but they show up as things in their own right. Things like planets and plants and people. What I'm touching on here is the relatively new science of emergence, which studies properties of matter that aren't themselves matter, but that arise out of interactivity, out of relationships. This is my cousin Joe. He's quite the looker. Do you agree? I told him he should have gone into modeling. Before emergence, we could say truthfully that Joe is nothing but a bunch of atoms. It's still true. The only things there are atoms. But to say nothing but a bunch of atoms is to neglect a whole galaxy of things that are also true about him, like awareness, flight, self-regulation, sexuality, and many more, not least of which is his roosterness, right? Those same atoms could be reassembled to make a dog or a compost pile or a smoothie. So is the rooster the atoms, or is the rooster something that emerges from a particular arrangement of atoms? That unique arrangement hints at what scientists would call constraints. You only get surface tension under the right conditions: liquid water, at the surface, no soap. You only get roosters when the atoms are constrained by the patterns that are built into Joe's unique genetics, his magic recipe. Under the right conditions, from nothing but atoms comes something else, something new and different from the parts, a fine-looking rooster. Biologist Ursula Goodenough uses the Mozart metaphor in her book, The Sacred Depths of Nature. Second edition just came out in the last few months. She reminds us that a Mozart sonata can be understood as nothing but hammers hitting strings. But remember, the strings and the hammers aren't the music. They just create the music. The music is something else that arises from nothing but hammers hitting strings. Also, the music is no less beautiful and soul enriching just because we know how a piano works, right? I understand the basic biochemistry of development. I've taught it. And when I think about emergence, there remain two aspects that just seem truly magical to me, if not miraculous. Okay, it's actually three, but the third magic is the child of the first two. The first is this idea that a whole can be more than the sum of its parts. You know, this is like 1 + 1 = rainbows. It defies that mechanistic worldview. Emergence does often seem to require large numbers of parts. So for example, 1 amoeba plus 1 amoeba is nothing but 2 amoebas. Amoebae? Not sure how to pronounce the plural of amoebas. Sorry. But if you keep adding new amoebas, at some point you get a slime mold, which is a bunch of amoebas and a whole slew of some things else. Group coordination. Wow, I've got quite a tickle. Hold on. Maybe I should talk a little quieter. It'll just get in the way. Thank you very much, though. Afterwards. A slime mold is literally just a bunch of amoebas, except you got to eliminate that word just, because once it's a slime mold, it's a bunch of amoebas and all this other stuff. You get group coordination. You get specialization into fruiting bodies, the ability to solve complex mazes. And if you give them a few 100 million years, they might evolve organs and brains and the something else's of pianos and poetry and popes. Which brings me to that second magic, the one about recipes. Reductionism looks at things and asks, what parts is this made of and where did they come from? Carl Sagan famously referred to this process by saying, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. That is beautiful. That process works backwards. You trace apples back to apple tree ancestors, then to the first living cells, then to the origins of planets and matter and so on. But Dr. Sagan was almost giddy as he said this because his generation of scientists was the first one to be able to tell the story forwards. A story now we call big history or everybody's story, the great story, the epic of evolution, Big Bang cosmology, and others, lots of different names. It's the story of the emergence of everything. So that second magic I'm zigzagging towards is self-assembly. It's wild enough, to me at least, that a system can be more than the sum of its parts. But it's downright mind-blowing to contemplate the self-assembly of such systems. And as the dream woman in the story hinted, it's not just living things that self-assemble. All this stuff, from baby ducks to human societies, are what atoms assemble themselves into under the right conditions. And here's where the two magics make a baby together, because we now know that the universe began with energy. Insanely bright light and nothing else. The first matter, the first atoms condensed out of that light during the first second of time. But there was no matter, no atoms at all there at the very beginning. As this great mystic and prophet revealed, matter is a form of energy, tremendously condensed, and it exhibits different properties from energy. Emergent properties like mass, inertia, and gravity. Energy is not a thing. Energy is potential, it's action, it's verbs rather than nouns. Things emerged from non-things, from actions, from light. Now, I lied to you a few seconds ago, a lie of omission, because light wasn't quite all there was at the beginning of time. There was also an invisible set of constraints, what we call the laws of physics. And in that first less than a second, and constrained by patterns that are built into reality, from nothing but energy emerged the something else of matter. There is nothing mundane about that. To make a 14 billion year long story short, everything in the universe is an emergent expression of energy, interacting with itself in increasingly complex and interesting ways. The light energy that came out of nothing at the beginning of time, I would say, is the ultimate magic recipe, an everything seed from which it self-assembled an entire universe, constrained by physical laws, and in time it spawned uncountable other self-assembling miracles like stars, galaxies, planets, and living things that eat sunlight and turn it into daffodils and ducklings and dignitaries. For me, the profound meaning of spring is that the miracle of emergence is popping up all around me, literally shooting up out of warm soil. Newborn oak leaves waving at me like little children. Wild turkey chicks wandering my neighborhood with their mothers. Millions of magic recipes all unfolding like little universes everywhere I look. And you know, each one is unique. Every species that reproduces sexually, which is pretty much all plants and animals, is genetically unique. Every one of those seeds and eggs, every bean in my bag, can self-assemble into something completely new, a combination of traits that the universe has never seen before. Speaking of unique individuals, there is a reason that odd duckling of ours took so long to hatch. We had two kinds of ducks running free on our farm, Rouens and Muscovies. Those aren't two different breeds. Those are two different species. She was an interspecies duckling, a rare and sterile mule duck, they call them. And when she started laying eggs, they didn't have any yolks in them. They were just duck eggs filled with egg white. Amazing. Wednesday was Passover, today is Easter, and we have Earth Day on the 22nd, spring holidays celebrating freedom from bondage, resurrection, and humble stewardship, respectively. And in a universe built on relationships and the surprising something else's that can arise from them, all three holidays seem perfectly situated in springtime. In his song, Holy Now, Peter Mayer, who also wrote Blue Boat Home, which we're going to sing in a few minutes here, he sings, "Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick is that anything's here at all. Everything is holy now." Spring brings such an embarrassment of holy riches that we trip over them on the way to the mall. There's no spring in the tropics, you know. Spring is a gift, but only certain latitudes get to open it. Don't leave it unopened just because you have shopping to do or meetings to attend. Right now, right out there, new expressions of cosmic creativity that have never existed before are showing up for their brief time in the sun on a lonely blue dot in a terrible vastness of mostly empty space. So get out there and soak it in. Be reminded that this same magic lives and works inside you with every breath and bite and beverage. Divine light from the beginning of time, expressing itself in and through you. Get your hands in the dirt. Plant some magic recipes. Do it with kids and tell them about the magic and the uniqueness of each seed or egg. Heck, you can even eat some of these nasty things after Easter when they're on special and too cheap to pass up. For more fun, microwave them first. Just don't let spring come and go without letting it nourish you deep inside. Take spring to heart. You never know what something else might emerge from nothing but a relationship with nature. May it be so. Thank you.
That was beautiful and science-y. Yeah. Like I told my friend.